Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and we have got a lot to talk about in the Big Ten. It's the football episode, so going to be a lot of news and notes, things like that, heavy stuff. We have Zack from the Big Ten Talk podcast and Connor from Inside the Nest here to talk with us today. Zack, how you doing tonight?
A little under the weather, but good enough to talk Big Ten football, talk about the playoff expansion, talking about all these different rumors going around about Big Ten conference alignment. This is a big show, so I'm excited to be here.
Oh, yeah, a lot to talk about tonight. We're going to get into it. And we've got our Iowa fan, Connor, here with us. Connor, how you doing tonight? How's Iowa treating you?
Oh, wonderful, man. We just snuck out a dub against Michigan State on the road. Never easy to do. So I'm riding a little bit of a high right now. So stoked to be here.
For sure, man. We're going to have a lot to talk about with that last night. That's one of those games that I circled that's like, man, if Iowa wins, it's going to be great for the podcast because we'll have a bunch of angry Michigan State fans watching. We'll have a bunch of excited Iowa fans watching. So upsets normally do well. People normally like when we talk well about their team. So
absolutely, man.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Hey, people, we have got a lot of good things to talk about. If you look over here on the side, you'll see that we have FSU to the Big Ten. Florida State is coming to the Big Ten. It's not like an official thing yet, but I've heard some rumors that I'm going to fill you in on, and then we'll get these guys' perspective on that. We're going to go through some USC expectations. We did this with Oregon a while back. Made some Oregon fans mad. That's okay. We'll talk about USC. Might make some USC fans mad. We'll see how it goes. We're going to talk about Keon Sabb to Alabama. Was Alabama tampering? Were they getting in there? Were they talking a little bit too much? Maybe doing a little bit of the tamper. We'll see. We'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about some Big Ten offensive line recruiting because we know in the Big Ten, that's what we like to talk about most. The big uglies down there on the offensive line. Can the Big Ten grab some of those guys? And then we're also going to talk about the new college football playoff format, the 5+7, those kind of things. But before we do that, please do remember to hit the like button, comment, be in the chat, let us know that you're watching, give us some information on what you think about what we're talking about. We'll feature your comments. We want to connect with you. Do that. Even if you're watching after the fact, comment and let us know what you think after the video. And then please know that we are brought to you by Big Banter Sports, bigbantersports.com for all your Big Ten media needs. All right, guys, let's get into it. So our very first thing we're going to talk about, Florida State is heading to the Big Ten. So this has not been officially announced, but if you've been following the saga, you know that some more stuff is going on. I actually know somebody who is an assistant athletic director in the Big Ten, and she's been giving me some information, and so I wanted to relay that stuff to you. I'm not reporting that all of this stuff is, 100% true and you can go with it. I'm not Pete Thamel or anything like that, but this is the kind of stuff that I'm hearing. I think it makes for good conversation. So essentially, FSU, as you know, is suing the ACC for the grant of rights, and the ACC has countersued back because if not, then FSU, Florida State, would have to stay connected with the ACC through 2036. That is like way too far away. I can't even imagine what's going to be going on at that time. My daughter was born in 2021, so she would like nearly be in college at that time. I don't want to think about
crazy.
that.
I don't want to think about.
Yeah.
You just took it to a place I don't want to think about. Let's get back to football.
Right. Exactly. So essentially what's going on is the ACC is opening up a bid for Florida State to buy out. What that number is going to be, we don't exactly know, but the number is supposed to be more attainable than what we originally thought. And Fox and the Big Ten really want Florida State to come over to the Big Ten. Florida State does not apparently want to go to the SEC, and the SEC does not have interest in Florida State. So, ipso facto, works out that Florida State has an avenue to go to the Big Ten, and the Big Ten wants to make them a full share member. Well, negotiations are starting, and FSU needs to join by August in order to be in by 2025. So we're going to probably be getting some information this offseason about this if things are going to continue forward. But here's the big thing with it all is you've seen all of these teams go in pairs to another conference, right? We saw Oregon and Washington come to the Big Ten. We saw Texas and Oklahoma go to the SEC. We saw USC and UCLA come to the Big Ten. We see all these pairs coming together. Well, the big issue here is that Florida State is coming most likely with Miami. And then the third school, we'll talk about this a little bit more later on, is Notre Dame. Notre Dame is coming because of what's going on with the college football playoffs, those kind of things. Again, we'll talk more about that later on. If you watch the full episode, you'll understand why that is a thing. Originally, the plan was for North Carolina to be that fourth team. However, if you've been following the legal stuff of what's going on there, is that they're having some issues with their government not wanting North Carolina to leave without NC State. So kind of trying to lock them into staying in the ACC. In addition to that, North Carolina is not a viable market for the Big Ten without Duke. So if you are an Ohio State fan or a Michigan fan, you get this because you hate watch your other team, or an Iowa fan or a Nebraska fan, or whatever, Minnesota, Wisconsin, whatever it might be, you hate watch your other team. And that is one of the reasons why North Carolina's market is viable, is because of Duke, who hates them. They hate them. Goes together. Their market is larger, obviously, because of that. However, if you don't bring Duke over, the issue is North Carolina actually going to be viable without a consistent rival in Duke that hates them? So it turns out that these rivalries in college football are actually pretty important, and we do need to actually keep those around. Zach, my first question to you. So obviously, Florida State, Miami, Notre Dame. Florida State is pretty much a lock. We're pretty sure that's going to happen. Miami and Notre Dame as well. We're pretty sure, but obviously those aren't on the same level as Florida State right now. What team or team do you believe makes the most sense to come with Florida State, Miami, and Notre Dame over to the Big Ten from the ACC?
I thought Miami died in 2002. Did I forget that? Sorry, that's
they did, but they've been resurrected with NIL.
Well, at least they're a shell of themselves. But I am not. I have friends that are Miami fans that I love, but in general, they've been chirping like crazy, and I don't understand why. But that's neither here nor there. That's not what you asked me. I think UVA makes the most sense with those three because of the academics and because of the recruiting opportunities, the pipeline, and the networks. You'd get the Virginia markets. You'd probably get some Southern Maryland markets. You get DC. You get DC with Maryland, but it would make sense with Maryland. You get UVA. And for those who might say, well, what about Virginia Tech? That's never been like it's a rivalry, but remember, they were in separate conferences for a long time. Virginia Tech was in the Big East for a while Virginia has always been in the ACC. And so while I don't think you get a great football program, you do get, I think, a viable market booster, which I think it's similar to Maryland and Rutgers, quite honestly. Like, you weren't getting Rutgers and Maryland because they were stellar programs. You were getting them because you were capturing the East Coast, right? And particularly the two of the biggest media markets. I think with UVA, you solidify the DMV area, which I think is huge, especially for recruiting, but also for media rights. And if you look at the whole map, Notre Dame makes sense because it's Notre Dame. They probably have the biggest national following. But then I always thought Florida State made more sense than Oregon and Washington because you are going to capture the Southeast market, which is the one you really couldn't get with their current footprint. You could get West Coast with USC and UCLA. You get more of it with Washington and Oregon. But Florida State unlocks the one piece of the country that the Big Ten didn't have access to. And so from a media perspective, you get UVA and Florida State and Miami, combine it with Notre Dame, and you essentially have the whole country now in terms of the major media markets. And so I think it's checkmate in a sense of media rights for conferences.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about. What do you think, Connor?
For me, honestly, I think that I didn't think about Virginia at first. I think that they'd be a perfect addition. They kind of match up well, especially as far as style. But for me, I wouldn't mind going after a team like Syracuse. I think that a team up in that area would be another team that, it's cold up there. They fit the mold of playing a physical style. I want teams that kind of, mesh well and come in as opposed to the USCs and, Washingtons that have this Pac-12 style offense and, defense. So I just want to see a team like Syracuse, maybe even we already talked about NC State, their defensive line and their linebackers. They remind me a lot of Iowa, so they kind of give me the most match up well. As I'm not really thinking as far as markets, I'm thinking as far as like a weekly stand like matchup base here. So who I want to see Iowa against, who I want to see Ohio State playing on a weekly basis, things like that.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I try to think of both the market and like who do I want to come in. I don't think from what I'm hearing the Big Ten is thinking of anything of like play style, which is kind of unfortunate because you would like for conferences to think of that stuff, but it is what it is. It's all about money, right? This isn't about
100%.
let Big
Yeah,
Ten
I'm just
fans
thinking as a
watch
fan
that
right now. Yeah, I'm just
right,
being an
exactly.
idiot, but...
Exactly. But I think the same way. Because I actually thought of Syracuse as well. I was like, man, Syracuse would be great because they could, they do play kind of that more physical brand of football. And, what were they built on? They were built on running the ball. I mean, that's when you think of Syracuse history, that's what you think of. And
100%.
New York offensive linemen are actually not terrible. I mean, that's one of the areas where they actually do okay in recruiting. So I thought of them as well, but I also thought of Georgia Tech just because of the market down there right now. Georgia has that pretty well locked up with recruiting. But if you get the Atlanta market down there and you get them invested and, we talked about the recruiting for the DMV, like they're, one of the best states for recruiting right now behind probably only Texas and Florida is Georgia. I mean, I feel like Georgia has better recruiting right now than even California does in some ways, at least overall, giving you every single player that you want. So I think of them, and then kind of an outside thought for me would be Boston College. They're kind of a weird idea there, but you think about like nobody is really up in the Northeast and right there in the middle of the Boston. And like, I know the rumors of like why Bill O'Brien went there for his family and stuff like that. But like, I still think back to that and think to myself, like, why would you take Boston College? Like that job is just not, like, it's not a good job. It's not a whole lot of money. Like,
not a whole lot of appeal in my opinion.
Exactly. Like, and I get like he, is a home guy and stuff like that. But like the guy went to Alabama. The guy went to the Texans. The guys went to the Penn State. Like, obviously, there's a part of him that doesn't have to stay home, and he was at those places for a long time. So I don't know. Maybe there are some rumblings there happening with Boston College that we don't know about, or maybe this is just me looking into something that's not really there, and it is just quite as simple as the idea of he wants to be near his kid who is sick and has a disease and wants to help do that more. I don't know. Zach, is it crazy to think of Georgia Tech, Syracuse, or Boston College?
No, I hadn't thought of them. And Georgia Tech really fits the media standpoint.
Right.
But, I think if you want a balanced conference, I think whenever we kind of fan book it, you do it on NCAA, it's like, how can I get Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, and USC in the same conference?
Right.
But like there are logistics to this. And I think with Boston College and Syracuse, you really fill out the bottom. I don't mean this negatively, but like you're filling out maybe the lower prestige of your conference, which you do need because, Northwestern, like you want Northwestern to thrive in your conference. You want Rutgers to thrive as best as they can. Like I think one of the greatest stories that I covered on the show, and I know we've talked about this several times, like Rutgers went 6-6 with a ridiculously hard schedule. And it was a huge success. It was a big story. David Braun winning Big Ten Coach of the Year, big story. And like, they're not winning playoff games, but like that's always been the heart of the Big Ten, is not just celebrating the superpowers, but also celebrating the teams that have really worked hard and really made a really good showing of themselves. Even just talking about Bill O'Brien, like we celebrated him taking Penn State to heights that we never thought they would because of the sanctions.
Right.
And not because he won a national championship. And so I think Boston College and Syracuse, again, you're hitting markets, like you're hitting more of that Boston market. You're hitting more of the New York market. So like, I think there's viability there, and you're filling in more of the, maybe the lower tiers of your conference, which I think is actually more important than people realize.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You have to have those guys down there, otherwise you're just leaving, the teams that struggle more down to, essentially die. And it's like, if you're a team of Ohio State or Michigan or Oregon, then you're like, oh, okay, it is what it is. But then, to them, it's not, it is what it is. They, they want to have seasons and compete too. So, Connor, what do you think about those three teams, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and Boston College?
I absolutely love it. Like I said, I mean, I'm all in favor of Syracuse. They'd be the team I want to add, but Boston College, completely forgot about them. That's a team that I've seen Iowa play in a bowl game before, and it was just like the most gritty matchup ever. I think that they fit that mold. And again, I'm thinking just as far as play styles, but I really do appreciate a team like them, especially with a Bill O'Brien. You've seen him elevate all these teams over the years. So I don't think that it'd be far-fetched to see them join and actually elevate and be a team that's comparable to, a Nebraska or Iowa or Wisconsin in that area. Maybe not. That's probably a reach, but and then Georgia Tech, I mean, you guys already nailed it on the head as far as the media. I mean, they've kind of changed their play style over the years, so it's kind of hard for me to really see where they stand. But I'm all in favor. As far just bring me whoever.
Just get it done, right? Let's fill out this
Yeah.
conference and make it happen.
That's what I'm saying, man.
I feel that, man. I feel that. All right. Well, good discussion there, guys. I think that it's going to be really interesting. And honestly, I feel like, and this, I don't have any information on this. It's just what I feel like. I feel like once we add 4 more teams, and like, I feel like that's kind of it for the ACC and the Big Ten. Like, I don't see them trying to reach 30 or something like that. I see, 22, maybe 24 is what they fill it out to. But at the end of the day, like, at least for the foreseeable future, I don't see the Big Ten wanting to go much more after that. So, all right, guys, let's talk some USC. So USC is coming into the Big Ten next year. We talked about Oregon, and we had some Nebraska fans talking about their experience with coming into the Big Ten and talking about how Oregon might have a little bit of a rougher path than what we might think. Well, USC is coming in, and we haven't talked about them as much because Oregon is kind of that first team that people are thinking will probably contend in their first year. I don't know if how many people think USC will contend, but they're definitely going to be a tough team to play. Lincoln Riley is a good coach. Many regard him as a top 5 coach in college football last year. I don't know where he's kind of universally regarded this year, but they hired Deonton Lynn, who was a fantastic defensive coordinator for UCLA last year, and he could do the same thing with USC with a lot of the talent that they have. So, Connor, we'll go to you first. What are some fair expectations for USC fans entering the Big Ten? Are they looking at yearly contender, maybe contending every 2 or 4 years, maybe contending every 5 to 10 years? What are your thoughts on realistic expectations for USC?
I don't think anyone, especially USC fans, will agree with me here, but I think it's probably like a 5 to 10 year thing. I'm one of those guys that I just think that it's easier said than done to come join a new conference. And if they do the very stereotypical thing, like come and have to play in Minnesota or Wisconsin come December or January, those aren't going to be wins for them, in my opinion. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them regress a little bit here. Obviously, they lost a lot of talent going to the draft this year. It will be interesting to see, especially with Alex Grinch staying in the conference, how they match up against him. He was just a god awful coordinator for them. They did get a huge step up, but yeah, I put him as like if I'm looking at the bottom here, it says tier 2, 1, 2, or 3. I'd put him at a 2 right now. I don't think USC fans would agree. They have themselves as a top 3 team already, but I just don't see it that way. I remember the Holiday Bowl, like probably 2019, and Iowa beat them by like, I don't know, 20 points or so. So they just don't match up well. Yeah, we beat them pretty good, man. And it's the same kind of style offense. So
yeah, I put together kind of a tier list of stuff I was seeing from other people. So this isn't exactly my tier list, but this was something that I kind of put together through looking at other people's tier lists. And what I kind of came up with was Tier 1 is Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan. Those are like, you expect those guys to be contending year in and year out, as long as there are no, big issues or something like going on. Like, those are the teams that should be contending year in and year out. Tier 2 are teams that, should be contending, but they might have a year or two where they are kind of down for a little bit, but they'll pop right back up and be contending again. That's Iowa, Penn State, Washington. I didn't really agree with that, but hey, that's what a lot of people put them there as. And then Wisconsin, and then tier 3 was kind of like that contending every 5 to 10 years type of deal, and that was Minnesota and Michigan State. And then tier 4, like, they can contend, but it's not going to happen very often. I also had a disagreement here, but Maryland, Nebraska, Northwestern, UCLA. And then tier 5 was Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, Rutgers. That's the one where it's like, it's going to be a miracle if they're, contending in the Big Ten, stuff like that. So again, that's not exactly my list that I fully agree with, but it is from looking at other people's lists that I found on, articles and online internet, that kind of seemed to be where most people were having these people at. So, Zach, what are your fair expectations for USC in the Big Ten? And then if you had to insert them somewhere on this tier list, where would you think to insert them?
I think I'm on record on your show actually of saying I don't know if USC is getting bowl eligible next year, which I've been walking back slowly. They have an absurd schedule though next year, particularly non-conference. LSU, Notre Dame out of conference. They have to go to Michigan. They have to go to Washington. They host Nebraska at home, Penn State at home. And I think the issue is, I think USC could be a tier 1 school, with the resources, the recruiting. But I think a lot depends on what everyone else is doing around them. And also, did Lincoln Riley get this defensive coordinator hire right? Because I think that the problem they run is I think Dan Lynn I think he's legit. But if they don't get the success right in year 1 and year 2, I think they're already playing from behind, and I think they will continue to play from behind, because unlike the Pac-12, which the Pac-12 was a good league last year, but like, remember, everybody thought they were going to be the Pac-12 contender, and they lost 5 games. They lost to Notre Dame by 28 points. I mean, that's not a national championship contender to lose to Notre Dame by 28 points. And that was with Caleb Williams. Now, I know the defense is terrible, but if you look at their recruiting and the transfer portal, it has not looked great for them. I don't care how any USC fan slices it. There have been USC fans who have said, well, they weren't going to be program builders anyway, the players who transferred out. And yeah, we didn't recruit, but we still have some great players, and they do, which is why I think it's hard. I think where I would look at is, what's the 5-year trajectory of Michigan and Penn State and Washington and Wisconsin? Because I think if you start to look at those schools and they start to dip, then I think USC becomes a tier 1 school. Because you're talking about, I think Ohio State and Oregon are well positioned right now in that tier 1. But like, we still don't know what's going to happen with Michigan. Like, Michigan kind of feels like it's on fire right now, and we still haven't heard anything from the NCAA. I still don't know where Penn State is. I feel like maybe this is the last year of their window. Washington, I don't know what's going to happen because of, with Jed Fish, they lost Kalen DeBoer. They lose like literally their entire offense. And Wisconsin, like, I want to believe in Luke Fickell, but he just brought in Alex Grinch, and we just got done talking about how bad Alex Grinch is. I don't understand it. I love Luke Fickell. I think he will do great, but you have a lot of question marks right now. Whereas a month ago, I didn't think there was as many question marks in the Big Ten. So I think I would say I'm in between that tier 1, tier 2 stage with them. But I think any USC fan that says they're a lock to be tier 1, like, you need to level with yourself a little bit and recognize there are way more question marks than Oregon or Ohio State right now. You probably have the same amount of question marks as a Michigan or a Wisconsin at this point.
Yeah, no, when I was looking at stuff, it seemed like most people kind of had them tier 3. And that was one of the issues I had with it, because in my mind, I swap USC and Washington and say, USC tier 2, Washington tier 3. That's just in my mind what I see more. And I think the future is bright for USC in it, that kind of like what you were talking about, like as these question marks continue to happen, recruiting is only going to get better for USC, because there are only 2 teams in California that are power conference teams, them and UCLA. And the rumor is that UCLA can't even scrounge up $1 million to be in their NIL fund. So like if USC has an NIL fund, they're going to do pretty good out there in California, even if they're not, winning the Big Ten every year, because guess what? That's going to be the California school. Now, Oregon and Washington could dip in there a little bit, but still the hometown school is USC. So I think the future is bright for them, but I love that you brought up the schedule, because to me, like USC can be a tier 2 team, but they could go 8-4 this year and not look like a tier 2 team, but they're still a tier 2 team because they have that talent. Because I mean, like, let's just go through the schedule really fast. Who here is a gimme cupcake game? LSU, not a gimme cupcake game. Utah State, yes, right?
Mm-hmm.
At Michigan, I mean, no.
Still no.
Like even
Still
if they
no.
have like even if they have the sanctions and stuff like that, which we have no idea what's going to happen, but like, they still have Sharon Moore, who won games for them last year, bringing back guys on defense. Like, that's still a really good Michigan team. So, Wisconsin at home, no. At Minnesota, like maybe if it was at home, but
if it was home, yeah, but away, no chance. That's not a cupcake, I would say.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I would probably pick them to win if they were at home, but even at Minnesota, I don't even know if I'd pick them to win.
I agree.
So, because I mean, Minnesota, I think they're better than people give them credit for. Penn State, no. I mean, even though it's at home, like,
yeah.
At Maryland, I mean, maybe, but like, how tough is the road? Traveling on the road actually going to be? So,
well, and with that, just not to, goodness, I can't remember his name. Coach of Maryland, head coach.
Mike Locksley.
Locksley. How do I forget who Locksley is? Like, he is like he boggles my mind of how he loses the gimme games, but then he'll like come close to
play up. Yeah.
Really, yeah. Like his teams play up and down with the competition more than maybe anyone else currently in the Big Ten.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's going to be a gimme game if Mike Locksley doesn't get his guys ready. But if he does, then you're in for a war, because, like, yeah, I mean, we saw what they did to Michigan last year. Like, that was a war. Now, Rutgers at home. I mean, it seems like
I still love Rutgers, man. I
right, and like that's
the
thing. Rutgers, like, they're gonna have a really good offensive line this year, and Kyle Monungai is coming back, and like it's either Gavin Wimsatt or Ethan Kaliak-Manis, which I don't think either one is like the best quarterback in the world, but they both have experience and they're both older. So, I mean,
right? No, I agree completely.
I think USC will probably win that game, but I'm not gonna say it's a cupcake.
Oh no, definitely not.
Yeah.
At Washington, that's not a cupcake.
At least they have like a familiarity with them now.
Yeah. Nebraska at home. If Matt Rule is bringing back as much talent as we thought, I mean, we'll see what Dylan Raiola is, but
that's my upset of the year. I think I've said that several times, but I'm sticking to that. I think Nebraska gets USC on the road.
Yeah.
I could see that for sure.
I can see that too. At UCLA, like, again, like all these teams that like you would think, oh, if they're at home, yeah, they're a cupcake. They're going on the road. Like, so
yeah, they got kind of screwed, man. They have a tough one. There's no doubt.
And then they're going to finish it off with Notre Dame. Like,
yeah,
they play one group of 5 team.
Notre Dame
play one group of 5.
That's crazy.
What were you saying, Zach?
I was gonna say, I mean, Notre Dame and LSU, you're talking probably 2 top 15, top 10 teams by the end of the
Top
season.
20 at the very least. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I mean, I think there's a legitimate chance that USC could go, 10-2. I think there's also a legitimate chance they go 7-5.
Right. But even if they're 7-5, I still feel like they're a tier 2 team.
Right.
Their record won't look like it, but
well, it goes. I think it speaks not just to the strength, like the strength of the Big Ten. Like you're not just like the issue with the Big Ten more and more now is, back 10 years ago, you had like Ohio State and like Iowa would rise up, or Wisconsin would rise up, or Michigan State would rise up, but like everybody else was terrible. And like that's just not the case anymore. Like even like I get on Minnesota and PJ Fleck all the time because I think, I feel like PJ Fleck does less with more, but like there's a reason why they went 5-7 last year is because the Big Ten's actually pretty good, like across the board. And I think if USC it thinks that they're coming into a conference that's a bunch of cupcakes in Ohio State and Michigan, they're so wrong. And like I really appreciate you bringing up the Holiday Bowl, because I remember, I think I was doing the ESPN Bowl Mania thing and with some buddies, and they're like, "You think I was going to beat USC?" And I'm like, "I was going to get bullied in that game," and they got bullied in that game. And I think every game, aside from the Rose Bowl in 2016, which was the amazing Saquon run, that's that play that he went like 75 yards. It was absurd, and they ended up losing. Penn State ended up losing. I think that's the last time USC has beaten a Big Ten team.
We beat USC.
Yeah, you said Iowa got bullied, but you meant USC got bullied.
Yeah, it's USC got bullied.
Okay.
I think sorry, thank you.
You're good.
In the Rose Bowl in 2016 was the last time USC beat a Big Ten team.
Yeah,
and that was
I
Penn
think so
State
too.
Yeah, like Iowa's beat them, Ohio State's beat them. I feel like Wisconsin maybe has beaten them. No, not Wisconsin. But
I was thinking Wisconsin, but I don't know.
I'll have to go back and look. But no, you're right. I mean, like the Big Ten, like for as much crap as the Big Ten gets for having weaker bottom tier teams, like the bottom tier teams in the Big Ten still beat the bottom tier teams in the ACC. The bottom tier teams in the Big Ten are still able to contend with, the bottom tier of the SEC. Like if the gap is not as large as some people make it out to be. But I think Chris brings up a good point here. He says USC needs a defense to be competitive. Until they find that, they're a third tier team in the conference. You're right, Chris. And I am being a little bit preemptive saying they're a tier 2 team because I believe in Deonton Lynn to give them a good defense this year. But, at the same time, they could just have a terrible defense. And then it's like, okay, they're a third tier team. It just kind of depends on this year and what we get from them. So
I wish we played them early in the year this year, because I think we could actually put up a lot of points on them before they find their groove, get a little bit of confidence for the year.
Yeah, you don't play them at all, do you?
No, not this year.
Yeah. You have to. Well, you guys have like 5 rivals, so it's going to be hard for you to play the.
Yeah, we have a lot of protected games. It's kind of wild.
Penn State has none, and Iowa has like 5.
I don't get it.
Nobody hates
I'm not
Penn
mad
State.
though.
Yeah. All right, that was good discussion, guys. Let's move on from USC and get to kind of the big thing here. Keon Sabb has transferred from Michigan to Alabama. So the interesting piece here is that this information was not Keon Sabb texting somebody or something like that. This actually came from the Alabama NIL. I think it's called Alabama or something like that. But kind of strange to see an NIL collective breaking the news that somebody has enrolled in classes for their school. So obviously Michigan fans are going on and on about this and saying tampering, they're cheating. Obviously Ohio State fans are saying, no, sanctions are just coming. He's getting out and doesn't want to be there anymore. And there's other teams that say, look, he's hired an entire new defensive coaching staff. Maybe he just doesn't like those guys. I think all are viable possibilities. Unfortunately, we don't have Keon Sabb going out and doing interviews telling us exactly what happened, but it is very, very interesting, and I'd like to get your take on it first, Zach. Just from all of this stuff going on, do you believe was Alabama tampering to get Keon Sabb to Alabama?
I don't know. I feel like I've heard a lot of things, seen a lot of smoke. There are some things that make it seem like maybe Alabama pulled the trigger a little too early. At the same time, it's hard. Like a player doesn't transfer unless they know where they're going, especially if you're a player as good as Keon Sabb, right? Like you
Right.
want to know where you want to go. Especially in the world, because if you go in the transfer portal and you don't know what you're doing, there's a very real chance you're not going to get picked up, or you're going to go a tier or two lower in terms of like D2 or FCS. Or so I think all of the claims of like, well, how could he enroll in 4 days? I'm like, well, I think it's very easy to be like, all right, what are my options? I'm going to enter the transfer portal and I'm going to be done. I mean, we've seen it with other players like Caleb Downs. I don't think it was 4 days, but I think it was a pretty short turnaround. Several other players, a very short turnaround. Would I be surprised if it's tampering? No. I mean, I think that's SEC teams have been skirting the rules forever. So,
Yep.
An SEC team tampering with an NCAA that does nothing. Oh, gee, I wonder. But again, if they are, there's a part of me that's like, play by the rules. There's another part of me that's like, well, if the NCAA is going to do nothing about it, like, is it really tampering ish? Like it is and it isn't. I don't know. I think the optics are not great, but then I'm like, well, I think the bigger issue is there's not a lot of concrete consequences that the NCAA is willing to put into play. So I think that's honestly, if that's the bigger thing is does the NCAA care? And if they don't, then I almost, maybe this is cynical of me, but I'm almost done caring.
Right. Jeff makes a good point. He says, where is the proof of tampering? And I think that's the biggest thing is like, there is no proof. But like, if we only establish tampering to when there's proof, like, then nobody would ever tamper. You know what I'm saying? Like, did we have a bunch of proof that Tennessee was tampering? Did we have a bunch of proof that Florida State was tampering? Maybe some, but so I'm not necessarily saying you're wrong, Jeff. I actually agree that like we need proof in order to say something for sure happened. But I don't think it's wild for Michigan fans to say it's likely that he was tampered with. For them to come out and say he was tampered with and that's all it ever was, yeah, that's not correct because we don't have the exact proof of that. But to say like, hey guys, there's something fishy's going on here, then I can see where they're coming from. Connor, you feel the same way? What do you think?
Well, I just think it's hilarious that Michigan's complaining about cheating. I mean, I know that's all.
I
over
knew
the
somebody was
place,
going to make
but
that joke eventually.
it's just like, come on, man. And I also think it's hilarious that Alabama's getting involved with a tampering case after what went down with Caden Proctor in Iowa. We had to report this whole thing because one of our recruiting coordinators had texted him, "Keep your head up." So if that's considered tampering, then oh my goodness, I promise you on everything that Alabama was tampering. Will it ever be caught? Like Zach was saying, probably not. But and I'm to that point too where I'm like, who knows? I don't even care anymore. But to me, there's no doubt. There's just no doubt.
Yeah. Jeff makes another good point. I agree. The SEC has always had the church handshake deals. Yes. Them and Clemson building their in God's name, image, and likeness. I always thought that was a funny quote by him, especially since their NIL money was coming from that church, which, we could also say, where's the proof on that? But, seemed likely. Blue by 90 put out a tweet, and this got a lot of traction today. Unfortunately, I don't have it loaded up to my computer, but essentially the tweet says Keon Sabb just committed to Alabama after being in the portal for a whopping total of 87 hours. So that means theoretically he A, entered his name into the portal, B, was contacted by most likely hundreds of coaches, possibly, but again, where's the proof? C, weighed the pros and cons of each school, D, then committed to that school being Alabama. If you have all that happen in a matter of less than 4 days, I have some oceanfront property in Iowa I would like to sell you. Connor, you have oceanfront property out there in Iowa?
Oh, plenty, man. I got plenty.
Great. I'm happy for you. No, I mean, and like, that's the thing. Like, Blue My 90 does make some good points here. Like, can you really accomplish all of that in 87 hours? I mean, you can, but like, does it make it easier to be talking with somebody first before, like, again, I don't think it is realistic to say this was 100% tampering and there's no other excuse for it. But at the same time, like, you can't just say 100% it was. Zach, you look like you got some thoughts.
Well, I saw that tweet earlier, and I want to be careful because my Ohio State glasses are I'm very tempted to put them on.
Right.
I just think if you're under the impression that Keon Sabb was evaluating 100 different coaches and like their offers, I think you're a bit naive. He just won a national championship. You're not going to consider 100 different schools. You're going to consider 5 to 10 at most. And like, if you get a call from Alabama, I don't care if Saban's not on the sideline anymore. There's still going to be a top 10 program. Like, so I think that's where I'm like, the whole tampering thing, I totally can see it happening. And like the time frame, I would agree 87 hours is very, very short. But where I would really push back on the accusations is understand that Keon probably had guys in his corner saying like, these are the schools you should be looking for.
Right.
Like, this is not like recruiting where you're like taking a year or two to figure out like, who do I have the best relationship with? Like, he already has established relationships with coaches. He already knows different cultures because he's done the recruiting process. Like, I just think that it's funny. I think I thought of this topic and wanted specifically to react to that tweet, and you just said it. So I'm like, I don't like it because I think Ohio State fans we did this when our guys transfer out.
Right.
But it's like, Julian Fleming took a longer time. But it's like he had a plan probably in his head. It's like, I'm not going to be a starter here next year. Who are viable options? And it's probably not Utah State, right? That's not one of his options. He's thinking Power 5, big name school, preferably SEC or Big Ten. Well, that's like 6 to 10 schools. Right. And he went with one that he was familiar with. So right. I don't know all of Keon Sabb's. I don't know if Alabama recruited him out of high school a lot.
He was committed to Clemson.
Okay.
And then decommitted from there to go to Michigan.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, he had at least some ties down south.
Right.
And so I don't know what his relationship was like with Kalen DeBoer. I don't know what his relationship is with the current Alabama. But I think I would just encourage everybody who wants to signal tampering when their player gets poached, just to understand there easily could be tampering. But then again, I appreciated your point about Caden Proctor. Like, it was tampering because someone reached out to him as a friend, which is stupid, by the way. Like, that would be considered tampering.
Right.
But like, that's
100%.
So like, sorry, my inner rage monster is coming out because it's just coming back. The NCAA is stupid, and that's all I want to say.
That's something we could definitely all agree with. All SEC, Big Ten, Michigan, Ohio State, the NCAA sucks, and we hate them. What do you think, Connor?
Man, I couldn't have said it better, but I don't know. I think when you look at it from a broad scope here, every team tampers. I'm not going to lie, to some degree. Like I said, if what we see from the Caden Proctor situation is seen that way, then it's likely that every player who has an idea of who they're going to talk to before even putting their name into the portal. That's just the way I see it. I could be completely wrong, but I just think we live in a world now where a lot of people aren't going to report things, and they're going to get away with a lot of things because it's easy if you just keep your mouth shut. So,
yeah, for me, like that's the biggest thing is like every team is tampering somehow, and the smart teams do it the way that they won't get caught. Like I made a post earlier today on Twitter, and this is basketball, so forgive me. I know we're on our football show, but Bruce Thornton at Ohio State, his mom is currently fielding calls from like coaches at other programs right now. And like, she doesn't want to hear from that. She wants to watch him play out the rest of his year at Ohio State. And, then maybe they'll think of it later and he'll decide to enter the portal or not. Well, this kid, I mean, it was even before Chris Holtmann was even fired. Like there were coaches reaching out to his mom saying, hey, don't let Bruce forget we recruited him. Don't let Bruce forget. Like there would be a spot here for him. Like, I mean, I don't have those quote words, but
them.
Right. Like I think that would be hilarious to do that personally, but like that kind of stuff goes on all the time, whether coaches are talking to the mom or recruiting directors are talking to the uncles or whatever, because there are ways to talk to these kids other than just, texting them up front. Meanwhile, we have 19 and 20-year-olds that are just trying to get prepared to play the next game. And if their coach gets fired, then it's like, what's going to happen? Or in this case with Keon Sabb, if your coach leaves and you have a brand new coach and brand new coaches on defense, you're just trying to get to learn your coaches. But at the same time, you might have people talking to your mom or talking to your uncle and saying, hey, Keon could be a star player at Alabama, or Keon should come back to Clemson or whatever else. And that's my main thing is like, we need to do what's best for the players, and what's best for the players is to let them make their own decisions in a good way that is knowledgeable and, doesn't require, them to make decisions too quickly, but it is what it is. So, I think we answered that pretty well, guys. Let's, I would ask more on that, but we have to move on. So, let's talk about some Big Ten offensive line recruiting. All right, guys. So it's been interesting because the Big Ten has historically not been great in recruiting. However, since 2020, actually in 2020, they got the top 3 offensive linemen in 24/7 Sports offensive lineman class. All the top 3 guys went to Big Ten schools. Well, now in 2021, 4 of the top 10 offensive linemen in 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings went to Big Ten schools. And then again in 2024, 4 of the top 10 the top 10 24/7 recruits went to Big Ten schools. And now this year, 8 of the top 10 offensive lineman recruits in the 24/7 top 10 offensive linemen are seriously considering some kind of Big Ten school. Now, obviously that helps because Oregon, USC, teams like those are also being considered. But guys, it's important for the Big Ten, I feel like, to do a good job in recruiting and to get those good players. I believe it brings, notoriety, brings prestige in those ways, but also it just makes your team better. So Connor, we'll start with you. Do you think it's realistic to think that the Big Ten could sign 4 or maybe even more of these top 10 offensive linemen in the 24/7 Sports top 10 rankings this year?
I mean, I hate to keep bringing them up, but you look at a team like Iowa and you would never think that they'd have the number 1 overall tackle from his class. And I get that it's kind of like where he's from, and that's going to happen. There's going to be top talent from all sorts of states. But I think when you look at how the Big Ten produces these linemen consistently year in and year out, and if the caliber of teams like Iowa are getting talent like that, then yes, you are going to consistently see them top to bottom all get all this talent. Like Wisconsin is one of those powerhouses. And I was looking through some of those names, and a lot of these guys, have all the big offers from SEC, and that's always going to be the schools that are listed. But you'll always see these guys taking a visit or two up to all these schools just to let them know that they are interested. So that's where they always have a chance, and I would not be surprised to see them continue.
Right. And I mean, Iowa, they're contending for, I'm going to botch his last name, but Andrew Babalola. He's uncommitted right now, the number 3 tackle in the nation. Dude's from Kansas.
We have a teammate of his committed to us right now who is a 4-star, so that always helps. I mean, doesn't guarantee anything, but nice to have those connections.
Right. And I don't think people realize how much Iowa recruits outside of the state of Iowa. Like I made a post earlier today, like Iowa has 4 strong prospects in the state of Florida right now. Iowa is one of the Big Ten schools with the most strong prospects in the state of Florida right now. Like you wouldn't think it thinking Iowa, but like Kirk Ferentz is doing work out there in Florida, really going after those guys. So, and they regularly sign guys from Idaho as well, from Texas. I mean, they go into all of these different kinds of states and sign guys. Now it's not always the 5-star top tier guy, but
sure.
Iowa, they go out there and recruit, and to see them going after a guy in Kansas, like that's a pretty good shot for them to be able to do that. Zach, your thoughts on the Big Ten possibly signing 4 or more of the top 10 24/7 offensive linemen in this class?
I certainly think it's possible. I think the thing that I'm just looking at where they're from. You look at David Sanders, he's from Charlotte, North Carolina. Josh Petty from Roswell, Georgia. Babalola from Kansas. Solomon Thomas, who's committed to Florida State, he's from Florida. You go up the list, there's not many who are in the north. Obviously Carter Lowe is an Ohio State.
Carter Lowe is
from Ohio. But there's not a ton that are squarely in the South either. You got a guy from Bishop Gorman who's that's Nevada. Couple Texas guys, guy from Kansas, but then you have some guys from North Carolina and Virginia. And so I think it's always hard to get guys from the South to come north. But I think the guys in Virginia, from Kansas, from North Carolina, you've got better shots there. And then every once in a while you pull a shocker, out of Texas or out of Florida. I know Ohio State pulled one, Nicholas Petit-Frere, several years ago out of Florida.
Right. I think he was in that 2021 class or 2020.
Yeah, he was it was a shocker that he committed. But that's, I think that is one key. That's why I think getting Florida State and some combination of Georgia Tech or Virginia really would help the Big Ten in the long run as well. But the other thing to keep in mind is there are better recruiting teams coming into the Big Ten. So you've got USC, you've got Oregon. Penn State has been a little bit better as of late in recruiting. Obviously, Iowa has had some big recruiting wins. Wisconsin had a decent recruiting class. And the big names in the SEC outside of Kirby Smart, like they're not as prevalent anymore, right? Like Saban used to get anybody he wanted. He's gone. And Kalen DeBoer he's not a great recruiter. Like he's a good recruiter. He's not great. I think Sark still has some work to do. I think he's a good recruiter. Venables is a good recruiter, but like there's nobody down there aside from Kirby Smart where I'm like, oh yes, they are without a shadow of a doubt like a closer. Where I think you might have more equal footing now in the Big Ten in terms of recruiting acumen. So the real difficulty is location.
Right.
but you have coaches who can go pull guys out. I think Dan Lanning might be the best recruiter in terms of head coach. It's probably between him and Ryan Day. But I think between those guys and some of the more solid recruiters, I think you could see this easily being in favor of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it kind of like those top recruiting guys like you were talking about. Like you asked me who's a better recruiter, Kirby Smart or Ryan Day. I think Kirby Smart has the edge, but I also think Kirby Smart is in a better location. So like, would Ryan Day be recruiting just as well as Kirby Smart if he was down in Georgia like Kirby Smart is? You know, who knows? But I also think Dan Lanning is a better recruiter than Steve Sarkisian, you know? And then like I try to think of like, well, who's the third best recruiter? Maybe Brent Venables, but like, is it Lane Kiffin? Like, is he the third best recruiter in the SEC? And it's like, well, I think James Franklin is better than both of them. You know, like it's kind of crazy because I mean, when you get down to like the nitty gritty of it, I think obviously Kirk Ferentz does a better job than I think people give him credit for at Iowa, but like I couldn't compare, you know, Billy Napier to Greg Schiano. You know, I don't have enough information to do that, but I would say it's equal enough that if the Big Ten starts really putting the emphasis on recruiting here in the next 3 or 4 years, I mean, obviously I don't think it's going to happen this year, but here in the next 3 or 4 years, especially if this talent continues to spread out more like we're seeing it do, and Iowa go into Florida and some of these other guys go into other places, like you can see the Big Ten start recruiting better than the SEC. It's not likely, but
especially in the transfer portal too, though, you never know what could happen.
Yeah.
You can see guys from leaving Florida to come up to Iowa just for the sole focus of playing time. So you never know.
Yeah. An NIL is very much an X factor. I know we talked about it a lot, but I think most Big Ten schools will have very competent NIL in the next several years. Like I don't think it's just going to be Ohio State because of the alumni backing, because of the media rights deal. They're all getting the same amount, and that's going to help maybe the lower tier schools. Like I think Iowa, I appreciate you bringing up the transfer portal, Connor, because I think Iowa is one of those schools that if they find a way to really like weaponize is the wrong word, but that's the one that came to mind. Weaponize their NIL, like you really could have a dominant presence in terms of offensive line. And I think you could do that from the word go with recruiting too, because I think you can point to past NFL drafts and be like, do you want to be a top 5 NFL draft pick?
That's what I'm saying, man. I agree.
especially if you're a tight end.
Yeah.
Tight end, no doubt.
Tackle.
Hence the jersey behind you there, Connor.
Shout out my boy.
Jeff brings up another good point here. I wonder if USC will be able to recruit O-line guys in the Big Ten country, Ohio State on the West Coast. That's interesting. You know, I think, like I said, I think USC is going to do better in recruiting here going forward because, you know, it's just them, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and obviously they have the advantage down in Southern California because there's Big 12 teams down there. But like, if you want to play real big ball, like you're not going to go to a Big 12 team. Sorry, Big 12, but you're not on the Big 10's level. It's just
facts.
Yeah. But like I could totally see USC, like if they have a good batch of O linemen in a few different classes, if Lincoln Riley really like commits to trying to get those O linemen and maybe, you know, takes a class off from, you know, paying millions of NIL dollars to a quarterback, then, you know, maybe that could happen. But yeah, I think a lot of USC's dependence on them working out in the Big Ten and contending, being that tier 1 team, is for California to be producing good offensive linemen, number 1, and number 2, for Lincoln Riley to be putting in the effort and putting in the prioritizing to say, we need to get these offensive linemen. So, all right. Good question there, Jeff. I think that's a good job of wrapping up recruiting. We'll go to our last subject here. college football playoffs, new 5+7 format. So we said we were going to talk a little bit about why this matters for Notre Dame wanting to come to the Big Ten. So we'll hit on that really fast, and then we'll open it up to these guys and let them kind of talk about was this the correct decision and whatnot. So what has happened here is that even if Notre Dame finishes the season the number 1 team ranked in the nation, Notre Dame would not be able to get a bye currently in the college football playoffs because the first 4 spots, the bye spots, are reserved for the highest ranked conference champions, which means you're probably going to see a bye from a Big 10 team, an SEC team, a Big 12 team, and an ACC team. Obviously, if a group of 5 teams sneaks up there or something like that, but even if Notre Dame is ranked number 1 and like the Big 12's winner is ranked 8th, like they would still get the bye over Notre Dame because of the way things are written up there. So that is one of the reasons why there's so much speculation now that Notre Dame is going to join a conference, because like no matter what Notre Dame does, if they want to win the national championship, they're going to have to win 4 games. They can play as well as they possibly want in the regular season, but you're going to have to win 4 games in the college football playoffs, which is going to be difficult to do in order to get there. So that's one of the big reasons there. But Connor, your thoughts just on the 5+7 model. Was this the correct decision? Do you think this is good for the Big Ten, bad for the Big Ten? What's your thoughts here on that?
I don't know if it has really a good or a bad outlook, in my opinion, towards the Big Ten. I like that they did it. I think that there was a no doubter for me. I think I read that it was unanimous for them too. I could be wrong. I don't know about that, but
no, it was, yeah.
Yeah, so it was just a no-brainer. And for the Big Ten, though, I just think that we were likely to have 2 teams no matter what. Once I saw 12, before I saw the format, I'm already sitting here thinking there's guaranteed 2 teams, maybe even 3. Who knows? I kind of go back and forth with that with the SEC, but so that to me, it doesn't really have the worst of outlooks on it. But yeah, I'm all in favor of it. It gives a team like Iowa a chance to not win their conference and still have an upward shot.
Yeah, I think you could see 3 teams get
For
in.
sure.
I mean, because I look at it and it's like, this past year, who would have been better for the college football playoffs? Like, who won the Big 12 last year? Was it Kansas State, or it was Texas? But
Texas,
other than Texas, was Oklahoma really better than Penn State?
No chance.
No. So who
That's
deserves to be in the
point.
playoffs there? Like Penn State or Oklahoma? I'd argue Penn State did. Like Oklahoma had a nice game, but they also had a cupcake schedule, and they, were barely able to finish with that. So
That's
it's interesting. It's interesting to think about. But yeah, Zach, your thoughts on just was this the correct decision? Is this good or bad for the Big Ten? What do you think?
It was the correct decision. I think I'm going to maybe take this a different direction if that's all right. I think it's transitional because I think we're probably all in agreement that this is moving towards the Big Ten and the SEC probably breaking away at some point. And so I think this is the right system for what college football used to be. Because one of the things I've always been frustrated about is that you can't play your way in. So Florida State is the perfect example.
Right.
For them to win their conference and go undefeated and not get in, I don't care. And maybe you guys disagree with me on this, but no one will ever convince me that that was the right decision to leave them out.
No, I agree with you.
Never. And that's been my frustration with the system we've had. And so when people, I think Tom Fornelli was like, I preferred the 2+0 system, like the old BCS. I'm like, that's stupid. I think Tom's a great analyst, but
you have no way of earning it. Like you're just whatever the opinion is.
Yeah. Yeah. What, who did we think were the best 2? Whenever you start saying, well, this is who we think, I'm just like, stop it. It wasn't earned.
Right.
And I like that there's an automatic berth for a group of 5 team. I like that because I think then it includes them. I don't care if they get killed in the first round. Like, I think it's great for the sport. I think I think underdog stories are really, really good. And I get that college, there's not as much parity, but if you want to create more parity, I think you have to do certain things to create it. And this is what it's not the only thing you can do. If you just do this and then do nothing to help elsewhere, then they're going to get slaughtered 98-0 every year. But this is at least a step in the right direction. My one critique of it, and I actually saw someone post about this, the 5 seed is going to be a conference champion, and they get the 12 seed. And it's like, if the 5 seed happens to be like the Sun Belt champion who went 8-4, but was the best group of 5 team, and then they get like Clemson as a non-conference champ who went like 11-1 or 10-2, it's like, we're going to reward the number 12 team by giving them. So that's my like one critique with the system. Like, I don't know if I would have on one hand, I understand giving the conference champions buys, but or like the top 5 seeds, I just don't know. I don't know. It could be better, but with all things considered, where the sport is right now, I think it's the right decision.
Yeah, I have to look at this at 2 levels. As like a college football fan, I think it's great that the group of 5 is able to get their champion in. Like that, to me, that makes sense. That gives them, viability to make it in. Like, as a college football fan, I would love to see every conference, like, I'd be like March Madness, where every conference gets in. And I mean, how much fun would we be having if Liberty upset, Penn State or something like that? Just got Penn State on the brain. I don't think they actually would, but something like that. Like, how much fun would that be to see a group of 5 team come in and upset somebody? Like, it would be so much fun. I mean, obviously, as long as you're not a fan of the team that gets upset, but to me, like, as a college football fan, that's what I want to see. As a Big Ten fan, selfishly thinking, I want to see, Wisconsin and Iowa and those teams like that earn their due, because, you have Iowa face Liberty last year. I think Iowa wins that game. You have Wisconsin face Liberty last year. I think Wisconsin wins that game, even though Wisconsin wasn't great. I mean, because I still think that the talent and the size and the ability of these teams are better than teams like Liberty, who, are a nice story, but let's face it, they played the worst schedule in all of college football. And they went undefeated. Good for them, but like, that's kind of going to be the formula now for group of 5 teams. Like, just play the easiest cupcake schedule ever, and you'll get in. What do you think, Connor?
Oh, no doubt. And I think that's like the one thing Notre Dame's still weighing on themselves before joining a conference is they still have power to control their schedule, and they can make it a cupcake every time for it. And I think they'd be fine with having the 6 or 7 seed every year. Obviously, if you can play one less game, why wouldn't you like try to play for that? But I don't know. I definitely think that you're right that a team like Iowa or Wisconsin is probably going to beat up on a team like that. But I've seen Iowa lose to North Dakota State, who is not even in the FBS. So I'm all on board for anything can happen kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I'm a fan of it.
Yeah. And I think to go off, and this is, I think, something you mentioned, JR, with the tampering stuff, but the point, and this has always been my frustration with the system, is the point is to care about the players. And so as a fan, like, I get media and rights and all that stuff and what's best for my team. But what I love about this is every team now knows there is a pathway to the national championship.
Yes.
And that to me matters so much, because you're not going to get any more of these, forget Florida State's. You're not going to get any of these Liberties or UCFs that have an undefeated season. It's like, what's your reward? Oh, a bowl game. Which I'm like, well, that's nice, but like, you're not going to let me compete for a national championship? And like, I don't like this idea. It's like, well, you're just not good enough for that. Like, I just think that's dumb. And it defeats the purpose of competition. And so for all the money that's in it and whatnot, I don't care about that. I want to do what's best for the players. And I think going in this direction, you can start, every team can start the season talking to their boys and saying, hey, we win all our games, we're going to be in the playoff. Now that's maybe not as true with group of 5 teams, but for the most part, you win all your games, you win your conference, you're going to be in the dance. And that to me matters a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's special about, basketball and March Madness and stuff like that. Like, you win your conference, you have a chance. And like, that's what's special about some of those like smaller conference tournaments is like, you see this team, who was it last year? Was it Drake or somebody like that like they were a lock and everybody thought they were going to make it to the tournament because they were going to win their conference tournament. And then it was the team that was barely 500 that beat them and they made it to they made it to the NCAA tournament instead. So, obviously we won't have that drastic of stuff going on, but still, we do have a few comments here. I forgot to put them up. Sorry, people. But Chris said, anything screws Notre Dame, that makes me happy. Yes, I like that as well, Chris. He also said 3 Big Ten teams should be a lock annually. I agree. I think the Big Ten should have 3 annually, and the SEC should have 3 annually, and then maybe you see a second ACC team in there.
Can I ask a question off that?
Yeah.
What do you think the max possibility is for the Big Ten on a given year?
I mean, I don't think they'd ever get more than 4. I think 4 is possible, but I think 4 is also unlikely.
Yeah, I'm kind of at 3. I mean, I would. It should be a lock, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it dwindle a little bit there. They favor the SEC. The bias is not surprising.
Yeah.
5? I mean, that would be crazy.
That's my thing with 5 is like I feel like the SEC bias is too strong. Like, do I think 5 teams could be good enough? Heck yeah.
For sure.
But,
no, absolutely. I just don't think they would ever do it just for the sake of they don't favor.
But I'd love to see that. What do you think, Zach?
Well, I wondered if 5 – my only thought is like you could have – because I'm trying to do the math here. 1 from the ACC, 1 from the Big 12, 1 from the group of 5, and then you have 1 and 1 with SEC and Big 10. You'd have 7 at large.
Yeah.
I think there's a world. I would agree. I think 2 to 3 is most likely every year. But I think there's a world where, because schedules don't match up, like you have like 3 11-1 teams and a 12-0 team and maybe a 10-2 team. And maybe the 10-2 teams like in Ohio State, whoever it is, like, well, they're really, really good.
Yeah.
So I think 5 might be in the realm of possibility, but I think a lot of factors. But I that's helpful. The SEC bias, I think is right. And my guess is they will want to put in a second at large from either the ACC or the Big 12.
Yeah. I think like if Clemson makes it to the ACC championship versus Florida State, there's no way they leave both of them out. Like, or one of them out. Like, they're going to put both of them in there. So, Chris has an example. Rutgers has a cake schedule and could end up ranked high enough to go 4th or 5th from the Big. I mean, they do have an easy schedule. I look forward to talking about Rutgers. I think Alex coming on next week or a couple weeks in. So we'll talk Rutgers then. But yeah, I mean, it just depends on how much does the committee value that schedule, because are they going to look at them and say, oh, it's Rutgers and they play this cake schedule, or are they actually going to give them, their dues?
Yes,
so
they will say, no, it's Rutgers. They played a cake schedule, unfortunately.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Right. Dave, do you guys? Oh, sorry, Dave. I missed your first comment. Let's get on the other stuff. Notre Dame should have made the deal with the ACC, or should have never made the deal with the ACC. They should have stayed independent and have all their sports still be with the Big East. Yeah, so they're still independent in football. But yeah, they do have their basketball and all that stuff with the ACC. I mean, hindsight is 2020. I feel like they probably should have, just because of the way the ACC is kind of like strung all of these teams together with their grant of rights and things like that. I know that Notre Dame has their freedom of football, so they're not quite as connected to it as other teams are, but the Big East seems like just as viable of a product in basketball as the ACC is. So I would agree with that. Do you have thoughts on that, Zach?
I have so many thoughts about Notre Dame, and if I start sharing them, we might be here till midnight. So
do you have a quick thought, because we're already 15 minutes over? But I appreciate people commenting, so I want to acknowledge what they have to say.
No, I think Notre Dame, I can understand why they made the deal when they did, because they wanted to maintain flexibility. Mm-hmm. And that is especially worked out for them in 2020. I think the Big Ten tried to strong arm them, and Notre Dame was like, nope. And the ACC was like, here's flexibility. And I think, to be honest, while the Big East is viable from a basketball perspective, it clearly was not viable from a football perspective. And so the fact that Notre Dame could have a loose tie with football, I think, was more attractive, but they didn't have to commit to anything. I think it's funny, when USC and UCLA made the jump to the Big Ten, my immediate thought was Notre Dame better get their act together, because they're in trouble if they don't. Like, if they don't realize they need to join the Big Ten. And I think Notre Dame fans in particular, are like, we don't need to join the Big Ten. We'll just join the ACC. And I'm like, ACC ain't going to last, guys.
Right.
And I think now we're here. Now I think the Big Ten will welcome Notre Dame with open arms. I don't think it's going to be a big problem.
There's too much money in that media market to not open it.
But Notre Dame's not going to have the leveraging power that they once did either, because the Big Ten actually has power.
Right.
So I do think, Dave, I think your comment is like I agree with you, JR. Hindsight's 2020, but I think they've lost some bargaining power. Because they're no longer the driver. Like they are in need now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Connor, your co-host is a Notre Dame fan, Danny, right?
Yep. Danny.
You guys ever talked about this or anything, or do you have any thoughts on this?
All the time. But as far as them joining the ACC, I'm just thinking about what they care about most there, and their lacrosse, football. I think they have a pretty solid hockey team. I think that they were just looking at what they could be most competitive in, basketball, all that stuff. So I think the ACC made the most sense as far as that. I don't know if there's ever going to be a decision that they make that I agree with, because I just hate on them, but that's just where I'm at, so.
I love that, man.
I'll never agree with them because I hate them.
That's just unfortunately, I'm blinded by my bias, but
yeah. Dave does make a good point here. Notre Dame in basketball has more rivalries in the Big East. That's true. I've always felt like Notre Dame doesn't make much sense rivalry-wise in the ACC. But again, like you said, Chris, consensus Notre Dame hate. Dave, if you're a Notre Dame fan, I do apologize. We will welcome you to the Big Ten with open arms, but this was apparently not the podcast that was super welcoming to Notre Dame. So, but we're having fun with it, so I hope you are too. And I don't know if Jeff is still watching or not, but he did say really fast, great room, looking forward to playing Big Ten teams. So maybe he's a USC fan or something. So, Jeff, yeah, we're looking forward to it too. I think USC brings a lot to the Big Ten.
Yeah.
I agree. And I'm trying not to crap on them too much, because I am very grateful there. Oh, okay. No worries. Gopher fan. Excellent. Oh yeah, you were in the last college basketball or Big Ten basketball. I knew I recognized your name, Dave. Sorry about that. But yeah, we gave the Gopher some love earlier. At least I did. I don't know if Connor did, but at least I did.
Sorry, we'll get it from me. Still wasn't a fair catch, but
it's fine. And Zach, you were a little harsh on him, so I guess Dave probably only likes me. I'll take that.
That's okay. I have a love-hate relationship with PJ Fleck. So not that I know him personally, but
How can you hate somebody that wears skin-tight clothing like that?
I'm just gonna let that lie and just
I do like PJ in the Big Ten though. I think he's a fun personality to have.
That is fair.
He's a fun
Yeah.
He's a stud.
What do you say here? Who hates what we hate? Who hates what we hate? Iowa.
No one hates Iowa. We're nice.
It's like Canada down there.
No one hated
Yeah.
Iowa, but we were all annoyed with Brian Ferentz.
Oh, and then you know what? I fully understand that.
You know what? The Caden Proctor tampering does kind of make you look like Canada because it's like Iowa tampered because they encouraged a player that they want to come.
All he says is keep your head up, and that's as opposed
like
to
other
what you're
teams
seeing
tamper
around
by
here.
like you'll never achieve anything at this school. Come to our school where you'll achieve everything. And Iowa's like, hey guy, hey man, keep your head up. You're doing great. Like
That's what I'm saying,
Man.
I'm gonna have to start pushing that narrative. So
it's real.
yeah. All right. Well, we have gotten off track, but I do appreciate all the comments and I appreciate everybody joining us tonight. The football episodes are always a little slim, so if you join in, we always have more time for comments. One last comment just to say, I love Brian Ferentz. Gonna miss all the field goals.
He made our special teams a lot of money, I'm sure.
Yeah.
He got Torrey Taylor a lot of love, that's for sure. So hey.
Yes. Yeah. The punter and okay, there we go. Some punctuation. Who hates Iowa? We hate Iowa. Yeah, that's the chant. Oh,
come on, man.
That's all right.
Gonna
Connor.
go out on that note.
We just had a consensus Notre Dame hate, so
That's true. That's true. I can't be like that.
I'm just messing with you. All right, Connor, you want to tell people where to find you at if they want to go listen to you more?
Sure. Yeah, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify. That's all we're on right now. We actually haven't had a podcast in a little while. We're working on getting some new stuff, but that's Inside the Nest. And then we're on Instagram and Twitter right now. So Inside the Nest 0. I don't know why we had to put a 0 there though.
It is what it is. Zach, where people find you?
Yeah, the Big Ten Football Talk podcast is on Spotify mostly, but we are starting to get stuff up on YouTube. You can find us there, Spotify. You can email me and follow me on X at Big Ten Football Talk and Big Ten Football Talk at gmail.com. And we'll be posting our first episode back on Monday. I had to take a brief hiatus, and then I'll be back here next week. So excited to be kind of the co-host of February here on the Big Ten Huddle. So excited to continue to be here with you, JR.
Yep, excited to have you here, man. And Chris, I think he'll be excited to have you back too. Great show, gentlemen. I always want to feel like
Cheers,
great
Chris.
listening audience. I feel like I have to come.
Wonderful job.
Back. Yeah. So, all right. Thanks everybody for watching. Thank you guys for coming on. We'll see you next time.